Hello, I'm Charles Mallet with a UK column interview for which there will be notes and links posted at ukcolumn.org. I have with me today Mark Byford, the bowler hat farmer. Now, Mark farms in Suffolk and he's been very outspoken on where our food comes from and how it's produced. Mark, I'm very pleased to welcome you to UK Column. Thank you for joining me. I think for the audience, let's start with a broad brush picture. So please tell me why it is that you're in farming and exactly what you are doing in relation to your farming operations.
Charles, good morning, and thank you very much for having me on the show to talk about this, what I'm going to class as a desperate situation. This goes back to when I was 21. I got shown the 2030 agenda and didn't, at that point, Charles, really didn't appreciate how farmers would ever be to the point they wouldn't want to produce any kind of food supplements or anything. And obviously now we're starting to see farmers being pushed more and more and more towards not producing food and being paid up to £300 an acre for farming pretty flowers that don't feed anybody. Now I see how the agenda comes together. But for me, down in Suffolk, down in East Anglia, we're a pretty well all arable, heavily contained by either grain or sugar beet where we are. I think that's going to have to change considerably over the forthcoming. And I do mean considerably. The ground has been raped of any goodness at all. The farming practices, I have to say, are out of date. Now what we're using, and that we need to look to be more sustainable and definitely need to be in the position now of bringing the new concepts, the new ideas, and the younger generation through this as well, Charles, because what's happened is the older farmers are the ones who want to come out of farming are being paid up to £120,000 to retire. Now, with that, they can take a one-off payment of £120,000 and they can then sell the farm, which predominantly ends up in the hands of either a banking organisation or BlackRock or Vanguard, you know, the normal vultures what sit on the sidelines. So we're losing a lot of the older farmers out of the system. That, I have to say, I don't think is a bad idea because they don't want to make the change what's necessary for us to be in a position of moving things forward. For us, where we are, we have now started putting some vegetables on the farm, actually start to look at producing real food. We've launched a shop on the farm so that people can buy local produce locally and pull the food supply chain to bits because it's all going to crash around our ears anyway in the forthcoming. So we've decided to get ahead of the game and make sure that the people that we live with and love are supported by what we can do ourselves, on what we can grow on the farm. From the field to the farm shop is 100 metres, and I think we need to get a lot more farmers to understand that's where the system needs to go. It needs to be more localised, not globalised. So yeah, that's I think where we're coming from at the moment.
I think that paints a clear picture. Mark, what I'd like to dip into before we get on to the sort of practical delivery of what you talk about is you refer to in effect, the destruction of the landscape through poor farming practices. Many of the audience will have an idea of the concept of that, but possibly not the detail. Will you just talk us through how that's come about and why? What exactly is it you mean by these sorts of practices, and how is it that they do affect, first of all, the environment and the landscape, but then, of course, the food that's produced from such an environment?
Where we stand at the moment is that for the last 50 years, we've been in the position that we do two main things in farming. We use glyphosate to kill the weeds. We use nitrogen to make things grow. So we had a guy come out the other day to do soil samples and test the land. And the conclusion was that after 50 years of the practices that have been used on the farm, and not just our farm locally, I have to say several were tested, that the soil is completely dead. It has no nutrient in it at all. So we've got to get back to putting organic matter on the ground. We've got to use a lot less glyphosates. The thing is, Charles, that the practices now are so old. 50 years ago when they came up with Roundup, and they GMO'd the seeds to not be affected by the Roundup, that they were spraying it on. But obviously, what we have come to realise now is that the glyphosates that are being used are carcinogenic. They build up in the soil. They build up in the grain or the vegetable, whichever it is you're putting it on, and you end up with a real toxic, poisoned food by the time you get it to the table. And that's certainly not what I want for my family. Certainly not what I want for my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren as they come along. We need to be looking at better practices. We've seen a lot of farmers this year put land down to set aside in massive amounts. I kind of two heads on this, Charles, to be honest, because on one head, you're looking at it from the point of it's great to rest the land and it puts natural nitrogen back into the ground. But on the other side, you're looking at it thinking, well, this doesn't feed anybody. And we have to look at the sustainable longevity of this. And where I get frustrated is the fact that we've got people growing fields of flowers and we know we've got an incoming food shortage. And, with what's going on overseas and what's going on in the UK, we are going to have food shortages pending the next 3 to 6 months are going to get real critical. Food prices are going to go through the roof. So I think people have got to start looking now at these practices and how we can better do things in the future.
Food shortages, food security, we will come on to. I think we'll go into that in some good depth. But and I appreciate exactly what you're saying. I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head with the balance between allowing soil, land to recover, but also recognising that it puts the area out of food production for that period. This might be a difficult one to answer, but in terms of time, how long does soil take to recover that's been treated in the way that you described? Say it's had 50 years of being chemically induced, having the routine of being killed off completely and then expecting things to grow up, in effect, under artificial conditions. What period of time, if it's possible to put a figure on it, does it take to recover this sort of land?
There's two answers to this. So if you can imagine that the soil which we farm, let's say the top 12 inches, every year we come along and we plough that. So we turn the whole soil upside down. So everything what was on the top, what should be on the top, and everything what should be on the bottom is on the bottom, all the worms and things, and you turn it upside down, and when you see ploughed fields, you see all the birds diving in and pinching all the worms, and people go, oh, that's lovely. No, it's not, because those worms are desperately needed. So what we need to get farmers to understand is to not till that land. That's a big, big thing, is to just tickle the surface rather than turning it upside down and killing everything, because it takes 12 months for it to regenerate the worms and the natural bugs in the soil, what we need. So what do we do in 12 months' time? Plough it again and turn it upside down again, and it's just ridiculous. So in answer to the main question, we've got two scenarios here. One is the fact that you can use silicon treatments and different treatments, putting a lot more organic matter into the soil, which will take 3 to 5 years to recover the soil to 100%. If you do it just via organic matter, I had a farm previously where we were, and that took 8 years for us to get the soil there broken down. It was heavy clay land. It was raped of any goodness at all. It had just been used for potatoes and onions. And the farmer who farmed it said to me, oh, we don't grow potatoes, we mine potatoes. And I think to me that kind of said it all about how much they took care of the land. So I think, we are looking at the quickest 3 years, the longest 8 years. And that's a long time to be without any food.
It certainly is. You spoke about the age of a lot of farmers and people being paid to, in effect, sort of retire from the system. But of course, like you quite rightly identify, people of that generation, as a rule, are resistant to change. The type of sort of light till or no-till farming you're talking about, how big a shift in, let's say, ideology would that be for people to adopt at scale, how would you effectively go about selling that practice to farmers?
There's the $100 question, isn't it? I don't think personally, Charles, that farmers are ready for what needs to come. I think what we are seeing is I work as a coordinator with the Land Workers Alliance, and that's a collaboration of all small independent growers across the UK and worldwide, I have to say. And with that, Charles, it's all based on sort of 3 to 20 acres. It's not based on the thousands of acres that farmers are used to commercially farming. The problem is that the commercial farming side of things is done. It doesn't earn any money. With the interest rates going up as high as they have in the last year, the contractors can't afford to pay the payments on the equipment that they would traditionally use to farm that style of farming. So everything is against the farmer at present. The contractors, the seed's gone up, the fertilizer's gone up. So they need to come away from that style of farming. And what I see happening is that a lot of farms, I believe, that are in hands of sort of 500 acres and above will end up getting separated into a lot smaller bite-sized farms, and we'll actually end up going backwards to small, mixed, diverse farms. See, if you have a mixed farm, Charles, you're in the position where you have the rotation of a 4 to 5 year cycle where the animals come on. They obviously, you can graze them off the ground. They'll then obviously leave natural fertilizers on the ground. You can then just till that lightly in. The next year you can put a crop on there, say like a vegetable, for instance, for the next 2 years. Then you put it back to a grass lay or a cover crop, which, for instance, might be turnips or something what the sheep could graze on over the winter. And then you'd start the cycle again. And we don't have enough of this going on. We just have this barbaric approach where chuck the fertilizer on, the stuff will grow. And when it's finished growing, take it out of the ground. And then what we'll do is we'll just blitz it with weed killer again. And it doesn't matter what the outcome, to people's health is. We'll just quite happily just boulder on regardlessly.
It sounds like a crazy system, but the way you articulate it will, I'm sure, make many of the audience think, well, the answer is so obvious. Stop doing it, look for local markets and start again. Describe to us, please, the pressures as a farmer that you feel from government, from industry, from other areas, particularly in a sort of financial context. What is it that stops farmers from making changes that would seem to be so appealing in so many regards?
I think what's going to have to happen is, so obviously under the new legislations that DEFRA are putting into place, they're making it harder and harder to farm anyway. We're seeing this new, I can't think what the terminology is, but what the banking sector and everybody's making, all these ESG scores or whatever it is, they're making farmers now comply with that. And that leaves them in an awkward position because if they're going to progress down the road they've been going down, then it's going to be taxed a lot heavier. It's going to be in a position of a lot more investment. And that's why I say I see us coming away from that and coming back to smaller farms, a lot more principle-led scenarios, to be honest, Charles, because we've been pushed from the commercial side. Let's say that's a mill, for instance, or the sugar beet factory, whatever that is, depending on what crop's grown on the farm. We've been pushed by them now, and the price is being pushed down and down and down. So if you take, for instance, sugar beet, Charles, as a classic example, when my grandfather was alive, they would traditionally, when sugar beet season was on, they'd have 100 men working on a field and they would have everybody out hoeing. They never used weed killer. Everyone was out hoeing. They would lift them all by hand. Now, I'm not saying that's the ideal scenario, don't get me wrong, but somewhere in between that scenario and the scenario we have now with dosing everything with weed killer is the answer. So I think what we've got to look at now is what that answer is. And the answer might not yet be out there, but I think that we should be looking for those answers now. The time is right. A lot of the younger generation are taking over the family farms. A lot of the farmers that I go out to, I also run a fruit and vegetable wholesale company, Charles, and we're finding it extremely difficult to find farmers that grow vegetables now. The most bizarre thing, in the middle of East Anglia. But I think what's coming about is what's happened is Granddad had the farm. Dad was told not to go to the farm. He was told to go to be a banker, solicitor, whatever that may have been. And I think what we're now seeing is the younger generation, the grandchildren are excited about getting back on the land, and it's the grandchildren what are taking over the family farms. And they're the ones what bring the passion for the change. So that change is going to be driven by the younger generation, not the older generation.
Yeah, the perspective of the youth and indeed, in effect, the outsider. Well, let's come back to that. What I'd like to look at a bit further now is food security, the idea of food security. You've just been talking about how things were in the past and people out with their hoes. I think there's a great tendency, it's very easy to put on the rose-tinted spectacles and imagine that things were better or in a good, in a good way. Do you, first of all, perceive that food security is manageable in the United Kingdom, in that we could provide enough food of the right quality, the right nutrient density for our population under the right conditions?
Yes, 100%. I think what we've got to see is a lot of, for instance, the farm where I am, we've now put, we've got polytunnels now coming on. We've put a new vegetable gardens in. I said, huge areas for vegetables, which are all fenced in to keep the deer off. Now, what I am seeing on a lot of farms I'm going out to now is that polytunnels and glass houses are becoming a thing which is, becoming more and more and more of. We need farmers to understand that. Charles, one thing I'll just mention this, because one of the things which farmers have got used to doing over the years is, let's say we grow a field full of wheat and we can return 4.5 to 5 tonne an acre, and the wheat is worth, this year we've been offered £205 a tonne. So let's say we can get 1,000 tonne an acre off of it. It's a nice, easy crop. You drill it, you spray it, you harvest it, you just carry on with a perpetual mill. But if farmers go back to growing what I call real dense, nutritious food, things like spinach, broccolis, kales, good quality vegetables, what you can do then is you can crop up to 20 tonne an acre. So what farmers have got to understand is that whilst it's been very cosy for them, whilst they've been living on, and I hate to say this, living on subsidies, because most farmers do not want subsidies. What they actually want is a fair price for the food they produce. And that's something, coming back to the earlier question about the commercial side of things, we're being forced down all the time on what value of food is. If farmers grew more vegetables that they could sell at the gate, sell locally to, let's say, local care homes, local shops, local market traders, that would change completely, because then they would be controlling the price and not the big boys who have forced the price down to the farmer and up to the consumer.
I think that's absolutely right. Food security, though, just a little bit further on that. What is it that you see as the chief pressures? You speak with certainty about the food scarcity that's coming. We know that DEFRA has made a raft of changes to what they're calling the sort of nature recovery policy, shall we say, from the start of this year. And of course, there are many other influences at play as well. And we're consistently hearing about prices affected by Russia and fertilizer and all this sort of thing. How do you view the true case for food scarcity?
Start of the pandemic, foods that we grew in the UK was at 60%. We're now 4 years on, and that's at 40%. That will be down to 32% of the food which we need in the country, produced in the country, by the end of this year. Now, I don't know about you, Charles, but they say that people have 3 meals a day. That's 1,000 meals per year per person who lives in your home. If we've taken the food from 80% to 60%, 40%, and we're now going to take it down to 32%, that basically means what we've achieved is getting on meals what we can produce in the country down to 1 a day. Now, I don't know about you, but if the boats don't turn up and the planes don't come in, which we're allegedly told under the 2030 agenda is likely to happen, then where's the food going to come from? The problem is that, there's people like Bill Gates have all these wonderful ideas of how we're going to produce food in factories, in containers, and I've seen this with so many options we've looked at for the farm. The problem is there's no nutritional value in that food unless you add it to it. But when you start looking at where all the vitamins and minerals that need to go into the liquid to filter through the hydroponic system to feed the plants comes from, it's all got to be flown into the country. So if the food doesn't come, the nutritional value won't come, and then we'll just be stuck in this perpetual cycle, going round and round in circles of just eating trash. For me, that isn't what I'm about. I certainly want my family to be in a better position than that, and the people I love and care for. And I think a lot more farmers are starting to step up and to understand that's what this needs. So I think what we're going to see on the security side is some massive challenges. And now, just to give you an idea on this, Charles, we've had rain practically every day for the last 9 months. I genuinely believe it's, manipulated by man. I don't believe that this is natural at all. What I would say on that is that I drove the other day to the carrot farm, which is the main carrot farm that supplies into Sainsbury's. We go in there, into their plant to buy carrots for the wholesale side, and they've got tractors buried in the fields up to their bonnets, what cost, £800,000 a time with the harvest equipment, what are on the back of them. They can't get them out of the fields. They're just so entrenched in the mud. There's 2 of them that I saw in one field, so someone's got £1.6 million worth of kit tied up in a field that they can't get out. You then think they haven't got on the field to clear last year's crop, so we've had a shortage of carrots coming out of the season. They haven't then got onto the fields to plant next year's crop, so the crop we should be starting in a few weeks' time isn't likely to be available until September, October time. And just to give you an idea on that, Charles, of how bad the situation is on a basic commodity that I believe is one of the given things British farmers have always been good at. Yesterday, I had to buy imported carrots from China because I could not buy any carrots at all from anywhere else in the world. And that, to me, speaks trouble.
Yeah, with which I would wholeheartedly agree. In terms of getting out of this situation, I know you have some very well-considered and comprehensive views. One thing you have talked about is the youth, and as you say, people coming in with fresh eyes and new ideas. I suppose, set in the context of the intense media and government propaganda that the youth receive, particularly on climate change, how do you see getting the message across to the youth you talk about, and how's that going to affect the way in which they do want to farm?
That's an interesting one. They have been completely hoodwinked into this green agenda, I have to say. It's interesting. I won't say the guy's name, but I was at my cousin's farm on the weekend. He was running an open day, and he's got a very sustainable farm he's recently taken on, but it's a council farm. And the guy who was there from the council made the point of saying that they are the largest holder of land in the whole of Suffolk County Council are, and they still hold a large sum of land in council farms. And one thing I've noticed with a lot of the farms locally, we've got quite a few care farms popped up over the past few years. They're great for getting kids involved in farming. And I think what we need to do is if I may use this as an example, please don't take me out of context here, Charles, but just prior to the Second World War, Hitler started the Hitler Youth, and it got all the kids singing on the same song sheet, and they got the kids completely on board with what they wanted to achieve. And that's kind of where we need to get to with farming again. So what we've unfortunately, 50 years ago, we had that. When I started at school, we had a school garden. We grew the vegetables. They ended up in the kitchen. The kitchen then fed us dinner. And we had this cycle. We understood where the vegetables came from. We understood where they went to. We understood that we got them back for dinner. That cycle's broken. People have no idea now. We get children come to the farm here. and you can take them on a tour of the farm, and we'll say, and this is wheat, and from wheat, we get bread, and, from barley, we can make daddy's beer, and from sugar beet, we can make sugar. And we get to the end of the talk, and we got the teacher saying, wow, it's absolutely fantastic what you've told us today. I didn't know half of that. And you think to yourself, well, we're crying out loud. You're supposed to be educating these children. That's worrying. We need to get back to kids absolutely knowing where food comes from. They need to be involved in the production of food, whether that's at home, whether that's, in a flower pot on a windowsill, whether that's on the patio, on a garden, on an allotment, on a small farm, on a big farm. Get kids out there, get them back to knowing what nature's about and getting them to understand that, Charles, classic example, when I was a kid, I never, ever was at home. I went out in the morning before mum got out of bed. I never got home before the street lights come on at night. That was the key. The street light came on. It was time to go home. For me, we'd be out all day. We didn't take anything to eat. We didn't take anything to drink. We knew what we could eat, what was about on the bushes. Simple as that. We knew where the river was to drink from, and we looked after ourselves. And that now is a very different place to where the youth of today are. Unless someone hands them a bottle of water now, they wouldn't even know how to fill it out of a tap. It's a sad situation we've got to get back to. The younger generation is where the power of all this change has to come from. It's got to be consumer-led. If the consumers are the children telling mum, I don't want to eat that stuff anymore because of this, mum goes to the supermarket and passes that on to the supermarket, or she stops using the supermarket, in my preference, and mum then goes to the farmer's market, the farm shop, to the local market, provisions market and things, and buys really good quality food, something the kids want to eat. The problem is, Charles, we've ended up with a situation where kids like to eat chicken nuggets because they've got some taste, they've got some flavour. You hand someone a tomato these days and it tastes like water. Why the hell would kids want to eat it? That's what we've got to change. We've got to change that perception. So when kids try a piece of fruit and veg, they go, wow, that's what I want to be eating.
During the great internment of 2020 and 2021, it seemed to be a very deliberate policy to isolate people, and in particular children, who therefore learned nothing about the world around them. And as we record this interview now, we are seeing the looming of a general election, and one of the things that's been tossed out recently is the idea of a national service, whether in a military or a civic capacity. Do you think, although it hasn't obviously been mentioned, but do you think that were that to go ahead, that there might be a place for agriculture within that sort of concept, that idea?
Absolutely, 100%. That is exactly what we need to get back to. We run different schemes locally. I run a CIC as well, which is about involving children, not just children to adults, in farming, food production, food stability, getting them to understand they can grow food at home. And I think, Charles, that would be one of the best things what could happen. I mean, I ran a charity for 8 years, and within the 8 years, the biggest thing we realised that while we ran that was the fact that most of the youth, we concentrated on 16 to 25-year-olds. Most of the youth of today are lost. They need some guidance, and nobody better to give them that experience, I don't think, than people with the knowledge. And when people start to realise that food shortages are real and not just something that, some guy in a mad cronky hat, what his great granddad gave him, came up with, I think they're going to start to realise that the necessity to get on with this learning about agriculture or horticulture, whichever you want to class it as, they're going to need to know rather quickly how to get that going. I would say if anybody at home today, is sitting in the position that they're worried about food stability, two things they can do, Charles, if I may. One would be that they need to go and invest. And I do say invest, because this isn't for, you to just play about with. This is for your future. Your absolute point of survival on this planet potentially is to invest in some heritage seeds. Go and look for heritage seeds, not F1. Do not buy anything that's got F1 on it, because it means it's been manipulated, messed about, and it's GMO. Don't buy that trash. The other thing would be start stocking up with some food, because the food when the shortage comes, Charles, we all know the toilet paper scenario. While we all laughed about it, it was very real. The fortunate thing was with the toilet paper, there was still a little bit of food on the shelves. Just on a side note to that I've got a friend who's very high up in Tesco's, and Tesco's, as a named one here because I know that to be the case, now holds 62% less stock in their system than they did 4 years ago. Now, when you look at that, 4 years ago, the stock on the shelves lasted 3 days. If we've got 62% less in the system, that says to me that it's going to run out really quickly. So do not be in the position that when this challenge happens, that you need to be in the stores with all the other people who are desperate to feed their children too. Make sure you've got some provisions at home.
Really good practical advice, Mark. I think it's exactly what people are desperately wanting to hear. What can they actually do? Now, let's just go back one. Your point about heritage seeds and F1 GMOs. Would you just go into more detail about that and explain exactly what it is in terms of the growing capabilities, but also the harvesting and being able to reuse seed and effectively the sort of financial control that's implemented by the sale of F1 seeds, and why heritage seeds are so important? I mean, I'd be interested to know how much of a problem you perceive this as being in the UK. It's become a very big problem in Africa already. But can you just flesh that out? Because I think it's one of those things, again, that's talked about, but often in a sort of rather vague way, and people don't really understand what it means.
Okay, so heritage seeds are seeds that have not been manipulated by anybody. These are just seeds that have come from the plants. I'll give you a great example of this. As I said earlier, I was at my cousin's farm on over the bank holiday weekend, Sunday and Monday, and I took him a tub full of magic beans. Now, the reason they're magic beans, because when I was 5 years old, my granddad gave me some beans, and he said to me, if you look after these, they'll always feed you. I said, okay. So he took me to the vegetable bed and we planted those seeds. And at the end of the harvest, we'd picked all the beans we wanted throughout the season. And I went to pick the last ones off the bushes. And he said, whoa, don't touch them. They're your seeds for next year. So I was okay. So each year I've picked them and I've left the seed and kept that seed for myself to replant next year. And I've gradually built that up and up and up. So they're what I deem as heritage seeds that have been handed down from generation to generation. Now, you can buy these. There's lots of companies out there sell heritage seeds. However, and I do say however, because a certain Mr. Gates has been buying up a lot of seed companies, heritage seed companies especially, and the only thing they're doing with them is closing them down. They do not want you to have heritage seeds because heritage seeds offer you freedom and independence. So you get a really good crop off a heritage seed. They're very resistant to bacteria, funguses, pests. They don't generally have those problems because they've dealt with that over hundreds and hundreds of years of growing. Now, spin that coin to the next one, which is F1. So F1, you can take, for instance, you can take a pumpkin seed and you can change its DNA to make it come back next year as a butternut squash. Okay? The seed looks the same. You can sow that. It'll come up this year out of the packet with F1 written on it. It'll come up from the soil as a butternut squash because that's what it says on the label. Now, where I kept my seed year after year after year, and I got runner beans from runner beans from runner beans from runner beans, 55 years worth of runner beans. The problem with the F1 is when you come to plant the seed you've saved, it will go back to whatever it was originally. So when you see these packets of beautiful purple tomatoes and, bright blue tomatoes and black tomatoes and things, when you actually grow them, they will come out like that. But that's GMO. That's terrible stuff. Now, what you'll end up with next year is either red or yellow tomatoes if you save that seed. If they grow at all, and that's the other side of this, Charles, a lot of this stuff is bred not to reproduce. And that's what's happened in Africa. My partner is Nigerian, and some of the things what she tells me about things what have gone on out there for the last few years with seed production and seed manipulation, how they've changed things. From our side now, Charles, 100 years ago, when great granddad had one of the farms, we would cut the corn, save the grain, and next year we would use part of that grain to sow the seed again. Now that doesn't happen. Now what we do is we send all of the grain we produce out, and then we have seed delivered back in, which is treated, which is GMO'd, which is messed about with, and then we set that. Even if we kept the seed, it wouldn't do any damn good. It's been so played with, so manipulated, and all of these things, what they do to change this seed, to twist this seed, is playing about with its DNA. One of the reasons now that people are so allergic to wheat, and people say, oh, I'm gluten-free, I'm gluten intolerant. You're not. What you're actually allergic to 99% of the time is the fact that the protein in the wheat has been changed because its DNA's been changed. So the protein spikes a lot higher. So your body can't deal with the amount of protein in the wheat. Therefore, it gives you the reaction, and the reaction is very similar to gluten. And that's why doctors say, oh, you're gluten intolerant. No, you're not. I guarantee you, if you was to eat a really good grain that makes a really good flour, that makes a really good loaf of bread, you will not be intolerant.
Very well articulated, Mark. Thank you very much for that. I think it's exactly the detail that people require on this. And it needs to be laid alongside the fact that if you walk into a supermarket, that is what you will be walking out with, those sorts of foods. And I think that is a message that cannot be overstated. I think it's also worth noting that this government, of course, brought in the Precision Breeding Act with the assistance, the declared assistance of the National Farmers Union. So that gives a very good indication as to the sort of support, in effect, that farmers are getting. Now, I don't want to send everybody into the sort of pits of despair, because you have alluded to the fact that you have a farm shop, that you're bringing on your horticultural side of things, and you are in a growing minority of people who have a solution of practical delivery involving the community. Now, please talk us through how that works, how people can get hold of this and start to do it for themselves, engaging with people that own sort of small parcels of land.
What I'm going to go on to, Charles, from this is I work very heavily and very closely with Catherine McBean from the People's Food and Farming Alliance. I'm one of the advisors to them. We've been looking at the best way which we could deliver this across the UK, and I put up a video on social media about a month ago, which went out to 1.2 million people, and then promptly got banned about 3 days later when I think it had got a bit too much coverage. And it was just talking about food hubs and food stability. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the food hub scenario, Charles. The principle is that, let's say we have a barn on the farm which isn't being used, and we grow some vegetables on the farm. We encourage other farmers, like I've been doing locally, to grow vegetables. Local producers of things, local manufacturers of food, but small manufacturers, people who still care what's in it. And I'll give you an example of this. I've been looking for bread to put in the farm shop, and I came across a lovely couple what baked bread, and I said, I wonder if you could just talk me through the ingredients label, because it's only got 4 things in it. And she said, that's all it should have in it, darling. It should only have water, yeast, salt, and flour. It doesn't need anything else. But when I go to Tesco's and I pick a loaf of bread up, it has like 47 ingredients. And that's the bit we need to do away with, because that's the bit people don't need, the 47 ingredients. So the food hub scenario is we get local producers, whether that be the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, to all send their stuff to the hub. The hub advertises on a thing called the Open Food Network. The Open Food Network is an open source system where the general public can buy direct from a farmer or a hub, and it ends up at their door. It's a brilliant, brilliant system. Now, Catherine and I from the PFFA have been working quite closely with Nick from the Open Food Network. I put the post up about the food hubs. We had dozens, and I mean dozens of inquiries all across the UK about how to set one up. Catherine and I are in the process of putting a blueprint together for that. We're also in the process of putting a map together for the People's Food and Farming Alliance website, where people who have a parcel of land that isn't being used at the moment can advertise that land for availability, and people who are looking for a piece of land to grow food on can advertise on there saying that they're looking for a piece of land to grow on. So this is about putting the two people together. This is something what, when this is finished, is going to change the way food is grown in the UK for a positive way.
Excellent. And to add on to that, I've heard you talk about community-supported agriculture for people. I think I'm right in saying people who want to get more involved physically. We're all very much aware and conscious of the demands of life that keep people indoors and people's desire to get outside into the fresh air and do stuff. Is that something that's part of this?
Absolutely, 100%. So when we talk about community-supported agriculture, that comes in two different forms. So one that could be just basic volunteering, and they go into like where we're now setting up the vegetable areas on the farm. People can come in. We've got people already wanting to come and help on that, purely so they can get a discount on the food that they want to buy. They want to buy nutritional, good quality food. They want to buy that at a discount so they can see that they can barter their time against the money which they need. That's a cracking system. Now, there's also the full-blown community-supported agriculture. So my cousin Mike, who I was saying I was at his farm at the weekend, he runs a scheme which is under the community-supported agricultural banner, where they might get 50 volunteers who all grow the food. So where we might look for 5 or 6 volunteers to help on the farm, they're looking for the people to physically come on the farm and grow their own food. They then pay a monthly fee. They work on a 26-week a year rota where they will aim to fill a veg box each week for 26 weeks at, let's say, a value of £25 to £30. And you commit to coming on the farm 2 to 3 hours a week to assist in making sure that that food is there, not only for yourself, but for the other members of the farm and the group. That works brilliantly. I've seen it in different parts of the UK work. It's massive across America. That's something that I could see could easily sweep across the UK. Within 12 months, that could change the way that farming is done.
Really does sound like it can, and that's beholden on all of us to get that message out. We'll deal with links to that towards the end of the interview, so I won't get sort of bogged down in that now. On the one hand, of course, we talk about being outside and getting in amongst it, and then on the other hand, we see what seem to be very determined efforts by the government either to control what they're calling our access to nature, or indeed suggesting that it's hazardous to go to these places due to biosecurity. And of course, now, in particular, the looming spectre of bird flu. What's your take on that and the biosecurity agenda?
Oh, dear. Charles, I love this one. Right, I'll tell you what I honestly think. I think it's all baloney. I'm not saying that biosecurity isn't an issue. Please don't think I'm not that naive. What I do believe is that you'll know that recently they brought out the policy where every household has to register their chickens to be on the system. Now, just to give you an idea, I'm on the death threat alert system to tell us if there's an outbreak of any disease, okay? A little while ago, they were having a culling on all the cows and, badgers, these terrible things that were spreading TB across the country from one farm to another, allegedly. What happens is the government comes up with a system, what they believe that people will fall for, and people do. So what happened with the chicken scenario, and I'll just go through this one in depth, because if a farm has 50,000 birds on it, and they put a 10-mile exclusion zone around it, and there isn't another farm for 20 miles, what they really need is an outbreak at the other farm. Because that's what builds the fear and the price, bear that in mind, the price of what big farmers going to produce a chicken for or the eggs for. So what they need to do is keep culling these birds to force the price up and up and up. So if we can get a chicken up to be worth an extra £1 when it goes to slaughter, can you imagine when you've got 50,000 in a house, what difference that makes? If you lose your herd, you're insured, providing DEFRA's the one who comes in and kills it. Okay? Now, as I say, the 10-mile exclusion zone. So what you need to do is you need to get the pathogen from one farm to another. So now what you do is you get every household to register their chickens in between. So what you then end up doing is you say, well, it must have spread from this farm to this farm via these houses. And that's where they're going. And that's where, we've got badgers. Oh, badgers have spread TB all over the country. Badgers don't go about 200 yards from a set. It's complete nonsense. They say, oh, these badgers. No, we've got badgers here on the farm. We had them TB tested. That's something you can do. You can TB test badgers. Not all badgers have TB. If you've got badgers on the farm that haven't got TB, leave them there. Because if they haven't got TB, they'll fend off other badgers trying to get into their territory. It's an easy way for you to keep the animals safe. So you've got to look at this stuff logically, methodically, and most of all, believably. Because that's the problem what we've ended up with all of this is that, 105,000 people are registered on the system for the alerts from DEFRA. And I think there's about 2 million people in homes have chickens. So if they can get all them to register, can you imagine the fear they can produce overnight by saying there's been an outbreak? And then within 2 days, it'll be gone right across the country and they'll have to cull everybody's chickens and the price of meat goes through the roof. Price of eggs goes through the roof. And they've achieved their objective of getting us to eat, cockroaches and slugs and whatever it is they reckon we're going to eat.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, that is exactly the way that it certainly appears at the UK column end of things as to how things will play out. Now, going on to sort of government actions, what do you see as coming in the pipeline? We've talked about the positive side of it, what you can do, what individuals can do. Of course, we're really only talking about a minority of people who will sort of change their behaviour for the good. The masses presumably can be expected to carry on permanent receive and not really pay heed to what could be done. So what do you see as the sort of incoming and continued threats from government and outside of government?
I guess we've got two major issues pending, Charles. One is what's going to happen on the Ukrainian border. People are led to believe that the Ukrainian grain situation is forcing the price up in the UK. That's total codswallop. No Ukrainian grain actually comes into the UK. Most of that went off to Africa to feed the Africans. They're the ones who are paying more now for their grain prices. Ukrainian grain doesn't come this way. If we go to war, that's going to force the price of food through the roof. And that's a decision what's only going to be made by the British government. Because I don't know about you, Charles, but they definitely haven't written to me and asked me my opinion. I definitely won't be agreeing to go, that's for sure. So that's one of the biggest, I think the biggest single threat we have at this point. If there's a change of government, will it really make any difference if we go from blue to red or green or yellow or pink with green spots? I don't think it'll make a damn worth of difference. I think that they're not in control of the government anymore anyway. I would say that's under the World Economic Forum fully. It doesn't really matter what colour's in. Do I see change coming? Yes. I think we're going to have to see some changes in between the government and DEFRA and the farmers. Otherwise, I think a lot of farmers are going to start stepping outside the system, to be honest. Where will that leave people? I think it's only going to create more food shortages. I think people, as we come away from farmers producing a lot of grain and a lot of sugar beet and a lot of potatoes, things what they've been able to do en masse, that really relatively easily with very few amount of staff, that's all going to change. And the government needs to lead that way. They're either going to do one of two things. They're either going to allow us to starve or change policy. I know which I think they're going to do, I have to say, and I don't think changing policy's in there. I think that this is part of a deeper agenda. I think that's going to be a very, very hard 5 to 10 years, the next 10 years. I really do. I think that the general public needs to stand up against this now. And one of the ways they can do that is to make sure that, I remember years ago when we set up a charity, Charles, and one of my friends said to me, but how are you going to feed yourself? If you can't feed yourself, you can't feed others. Excuse me. So we were saying that we were going to, we didn't want to take a wage. And he said, but if you don't feed yourself, you can't feed others. And that's true. And that stands for the farming community as well. Farmers are starting to understand that if they don't grow food, there is no food. And that is crucial. The minute that happens and the farmers start to wake up, they'll wake up en masse. Now, the problem is, it comes back to what I said earlier about seed and seed manipulation. Unless farmers are quick, they're not going to get any seed. We've been putting heritage seeds away for years. We've been building massive reserves deliberately. Have we got enough to fill the whole farm? No, of course we haven't. Yes, hundreds of acres here, but what we have got enough to do is certainly to feed ourselves and feed the local area, and to make a big impact in the amount of food what will not be available through the food supply chain if it continues the way it is.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point, added to which, of course, we know that supermarkets are running much leaner on stock, like you've just been talking about. And not just that, but they operate at very, very small margins on the individual products. So in actual fact, although they do have an awful amount of control, they are also at the same time very vulnerable. And therefore, moving away from them, even if it's only incremental at the start, could and should make a significant difference, which leads me into the next question, which is, I've heard you talk about your 5 a day, but yours is slightly different and is essentially to do with sort of, strengthening your own position in moving away from the control system. Just talk us through that.
Absolutely. Strife for 5. So Strife for 5 is not about having your 5 a day vegetables. That can be one of them, don't get me wrong. This is about doing 5 things a day that take you away from the system and away from the power, the control the system has over you. So we've been looking at different things that we could do. So we've now banned ourselves going from supermarkets, and I talk about this from the fruit and veg wholesale side. We used to spend £2,000 a month on fuel from Tesco's, and instead now we go to an independent retailer. Now, don't get me wrong, I still understand that the corporations and the systems in the background, but the profit is in the hands of a small independent people now who own the petrol stations. It's an Indian family. They're 10 pence a litre cheaper than Tesco's, I will say, and I don't just pick on Tesco's for that. I'm using that as a pure example. They're 10 pence a litre cheaper. It's saving us money, and that money's not going into that corporation which sits with BlackRock and Vanguard and everybody else. Look at 5 things a day. Where do you shop? How do you pay? If you pay for things on a credit card, or you pay for things, on a card, the problem is we don't have any card facilities in our farm shop, because we worked out on every £100 it was going to cost us £2.50 to take the money. So on every £1,000 we'd lose 25 quid. Well, that's a fortune. We can't afford to do that. So let's not do it. So we just put signs up and put it all out on social media. Cash only. There's a tin in there. It's all locked up. You can drop your notes in there. That's great. Thank you very much. That's where we need to get back to. We pay all our suppliers with cash. So that removes them having to pay the 2.5%, 3% as well. Pay by cash. Look at where you're spending your money. There's dozens of these things, Charles, in the course of a week you can start to address. This might be, for instance, myself, I have to say I've been blessed all of my life never to have to overly cook for myself. I've always had partners that could more than capably look after me, and I thank each and every one of them for that. Not that there's been a lot, I do hasten to add, but I put that there that they've all been very good at that. But for me, myself, I've started taking up a bit of cooking, and so I can understand the basics of how to make food. Because again, this is one of the things that over the course of that 50 years I speak about that people have come away from. It's convenient when you get home just to chuck some chicken dippers and some fries in the oven. 15 minutes, it's done. There you go, kids, there's your dinner. There's no goodness in it. Stop it. Look at one of your 5 a day could be just addressing your nutritional value, what you actually take in. look at your fuel. Well, look at your where you spend your money. Look at how you spend your money. There's dozens upon dozens of these things. Look at 5 things every day that take you away from the system. It might be that I know there's a lot of people don't hold with paying for utilities, for instance, because they say that utilities are free, or that they shouldn't pay council tax because that money's going to the government and the government's going to war, and it states in the law that we're not allowed to subsidise terrorists. Well, people are arguing about paying all sorts of bills at present. Whether you agree or don't agree on that, as far as the public's concerned, what I do think is there is changes we can all make. And those 5 things a day, and I'll just go through this, Charles. You imagine if everybody just did one a day and we could get the whole country not to shop their food shop in Tesco's, Sainsbury's, Aldi, Lidl, whoever it might be, whichever one of the big ones it is, if we could just take away that and just take that away, the fuel, take it away, put it back in the hand of independent traders, that to me would be gold.
Yeah, which I think everybody listening would absolutely wholeheartedly agree with. And I think, I was just going to add to that, of course, that I think there is a great misconception about the relative values of food, in that people are naturally drawn towards food that's cheaper because it's perceived to be better value. But of course, what you're saying in terms of the nutrient density and what it will give your system, in actual fact, that food that appears to have a higher price, in effect, you get what you pay for. And I think that's something that people need to sort of have a bit of a recalibration on. Now, Mark, I think from what you've said and the direction you've given, I can imagine there are a lot of people who would have been watching and listening who will be thinking, well, I'm within range of East Anglia. I want to see this man and what he's doing and how he's farming. Do you sort of accept visitors to the farm and walk people around and show them what you're up to?
Yes, we'd love to, definitely. I think that we need to be in the position that we need to do a lot more of that as well, Charles, to be honest. People can contact us either via the Facebook page or the YouTube channel. Contact us, let us know. We're going to be running some open days on the farm this year, which we'll advertise on social media. We have been running some barbecues and things on the farm for local people to come and see what we're up to, and for them to witness the physical growing of the food, because I think that's key. It's all good and well opening the shop and telling people, well, we're growing it over there on a field. But when they actually come and they go, so what's that? And you go, oh, that's the broad beans. And why are those ones smaller? Because that's the next crop. And why are those ones? And that's the next crop. And that's French beans, and that's runner beans, and that's tomatoes. And we've got 16 different varieties of tomatoes. And we've got strawberry plant, and we've got this, and we've got... So I think as people start to see the vegetables growing, the different stages of its growth, then people are going to start to understand that actually I can feel it, see it, touch it. It's tangible. Charles, one of the things which we've got a problem with at present in the UK especially is that people's knowledge of fruit and veg is that it's stacked in green crates on a shelf in a supermarket. And that is a problem because, when you say to kids, or we haven't come around the farm, and you say to them, well, where do you get chicken from? They say, well, Tesco's or whatever supermarket they shop in. You can tell I used to be a Tesco's customer, can't you? You can tell that. So, but, the kids, when they go to school, they're not taught this stuff again. And, parents now, because of the convenience of food, the kids walk around, most parents wouldn't know what to do with half the fruit and veg on the shelf anyway. That's one of the big, and that's probably becoming worse and worse and worse. I don't know if you saw the paper from Sainsbury's did a paper about 2030 and how we will change the face of farming. Sainsbury's have basically said we do not need any farmers by 2030. Everything will be grown in factories, in hydroponics. The meat will be either lab grown or based on a jellyfish, which can be manipulated and changed to look like meat. Or we're going to be blessed by the fact they're going to allow us to even grow meat at home. I mean, can you just get excited about that? Imagine opening your birthday comes and and you open a present and it's a big lump of steak. Well, it's not, but you know, if you drop some water on it, it'll turn into a big steak over the course of a couple of weeks. Not for me, thank you.
No, and I think anyone who's listened to this interview will be leaping up out of their chair, ready to go out and make some sort of advancement into their own circumstances or improving their own circumstances. So we'll wind up now, but before we do, let's just go through a bit of a recap as to where people can go to look at the open food network and the community supported agriculture. Where should people actually go to start looking at this?
Charles, I've got to be honest, I don't know none of the website links off the top of my head. What I will say is if they Google any of these or whatever search engine they use, the Open Food Network is always top of the list. Community supported agriculture, the Land Workers Alliance, they all give different options. And as well, the PFFA, the People's Food and Farming Alliance, that's a big one, what I'm getting involved more and more heavily with. I'll just say that if people want to support the work we're doing, that there is a donation button on the People's Food and Farming Alliance page. So what I see people needing to do is go to those sites particularly. Find me on social media under the Bowler Hat Farmer or the ARC Project on Facebook. That's the actual project themselves. We've got a 16-acre site we're now starting to develop as well, which is a site which has been gifted to us to use on a long-term basis. We're going to turn that into a sustainable farm where we're going to keep some animals as well. I'm excited about that one because that's going to give us, I'm hoping we're going to be able to have some cows on that site so we can have our own dairy as well. That will be exciting.
Excellent, Mark. Yes, indeed. A very exciting future, not just for you and your projects, but also I think for everybody who's been listening in. So much food for thought, if you will. But it's been a pleasure to have you on. And I'd just like to say at this point that on the UK column front, if you are in a position to support us financially, which is only a £5 a month membership or indeed a donation, then it does help us to bring interviews like this to you. So please do consider that if you're not already doing so. As I said at the beginning, there'll be notes and links to Mark's insights at the posted with this interview at ukcolumn.org. So it just remains for me to say to you, Mark, thank you very much indeed for coming on and giving an amazing sense of positivity and really very well considered insight into your life, your philosophy and your farming practices. Please keep in touch.
Charles, it's been great to come on the show. Thank you so much for having me on. It's nice to be able to get the message out there to the public. Whilst I understand that a lot of people still need to bury their heads in the MSN, a lot of people are waking up. We've seen vast amounts of people move into this kind of media now, and just continue the good work you're doing and getting the message out. And thank you for having us on.